The Big 12 and therefore the Cyclones are constantly getting the short end of the stick when it comes to the college football playoff, and it sounds like Rece Davis is a fan of it. We're talking about it today on Locked On Cyclones.
You are Locked On Cyclones, your daily podcast on the Iowa State Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Shout out to you for being here every single day, making this your first watch or listen of the day. I appreciate it more than you know. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcasting platform, be sure to hit subscribe so we can prove once and for all that it is, in fact, a Cyclone state. Today, we are talking about Rece Davis and his comments that seem to be kind of angled towards the Big 12 and the ACC when talking about the college football playoff. Then we are going to dive into the basketball non-conference exhibition games and what those mean for the Cyclones. And finally, we are going to round things out with some comments made by Mac Brown about the transfer portal and my thoughts on his comments and the transfer portal as a whole. I can't wait to dive into all that, obviously, at the end. But first, we have to talk about what Rece Davis said, because Rece Davis, obviously, of College Gameday, he's in the college football 25 NCAA football game, whatever the official name is. It's a mouthful. But obviously, kind of a figurehead for college football, right? It's really Rece Davis and Kirk Herbstreit are in that conversation. Pat McAfee kind of there because of the antics that he has on game day and really outside of that, really everywhere. And I guess Lee Corso, but he's retired now. So Rece Davis and Kirk, I feel like, are kind of those two guys at the very top. Maybe Nick Saban with everything he's been doing. Nonetheless, the reason I'm talking about this is because of how big Rece Davis is in the college football kind of sphere, right? And these comments, wild to me, at least, to say the least. So when, the college football playoff management committee announced that there was going to be a change for this upcoming year of going straight to, the just kind of straight seating, top to bottom. It's no longer the the conference champions become 1 through 4, and then the fifth ranked obviously still makes it, but it's not one of those buys, and it was kind of this whole mess. But they changed it, and now it's just literally 1 to 16, or 1 to 12. 16 will be down the road, but 1 to 12 right now for this coming year. That's how they're seated. That's how they're going to go about it. And that was kind of big news. Everyone was kind of yapping about it. And Rece Davis was on the College Gameday podcast and had this quote that I thought stood out. And we'll talk about, kind of all the things that he said. But this quote is what mattered to me. He said, quote, no matter how good intentions there are, no matter how many good intentions there are, and no matter how many hours they spend in committee, and no matter how many studies they do and data points of data they analyze, they're not going to get it right because they can't. There's no such thing as right. Now, a lot of ands in there. Data was used a couple times. But what the crux of the statement is at the end when he says they're not going to get it right because there's no such thing as right. To me, this is literally just a cop-out. It's like, well, we're never going to get it right, so if we're going to be wrong, like, it's not that big a deal. I feel like it is. I feel like maybe we should try to get it at least pretty close to right. I feel like that's what maybe we should do here. Is that not? I feel like that's only fair. To me, this sounds like this is like, well, we get it. Everyone's upset about what's going on. Obviously, the Big 12 and the ACC more so than the Big 10 and the SEC. But there's nothing we can do about it because we're not going to be perfect. Okay, there is no right. We're never going to get it right. You got to deal with it. Why don't we just make it pretty close to right, or at least have it make sense? I feel like that's maybe the best play here. So when I read this, I said, okay, that seems immediately like a cop-out. But let's look through some of the other quotes that he's got here. Really what they're kind of talking about is, to my understanding, that there's always going to be someone who's upset. And that's true. That is 100% true. Look at basketball this last year with North Carolina getting in and teams like West Virginia not making it. There's going to be teams that are upset. That's a 64 team, or I suppose 68 team playoff. And there's going to be those teams that are upset that they're not in because you don't get the chance to make the run for the title. I understand that. I'm not saying that that's wrong, but that is always going to be the case. So when when the playoff moves to 16 teams, 17, 18, 19, all going to be upset. And that's just that's what's going to happen. That doesn't mean though that the system can be flawed. That does, to me, yes, there's always going to be people upset. That's just how it works. The people right on the outside are always going to be upset. But that doesn't mean you can just use that as an excuse to be like, well, I mean, we're never like what. Let's make the system as good as we possibly can here. Does that make sense? Some of these other quotes here. He said, quote, the BCS formula changed every time somebody got mad about what the formula spit out was its biggest problem. It wasn't all the other stuff. It undermined the credibility with the public. The best way to do this would be to have the conference champions, how many ever you decided. And then after that, you assign a criteria almost like the old BCS. So this is where he's kind of talking about what he would do. The subjectivity of the people in the room would be a certain percentage of the formula, and the best set of data, compilation of various computer rankings, strength of schedule, whatever you want to use, becomes a certain percentage of the ranking. How you fare to your conference becomes a certain percentage of the ranking. And then the subjectivity more so than the old poll system in the BCS, where that factored in, but the actual the actual evaluation of the committee maybe carries a huge percentage of that. And then you come out with a top 16. In some years, the Big Ten might get 7. In some years, they might get 3. And that would be best for the sport. Not to unpack here. I don't love that it's like so based on subjectivity. I don't, to be completely honest. I understand why that's the case. You want the best teams in. And sometimes a team that's red hot isn't going to fare as analytically well as another team. I get that. But at the end of the day, too, the analytics, they can be posed in either direction. You know, they can either be a good thing or a bad thing for a team. But a lot of times they do point towards the better team. Like realistically, when you gather all of the data, generally it speaks to who has been better this season. Now, when he mentions, how they play in comparison to their conference, I think that that's worth talking about, because there are going to be teams like, I feel like it's in the ACC where there's going to be a top tier ACC team, played a lot of other ACC teams that aren't so great. If you're miles ahead of the rest of the ACC and your statistics are really, really good, how does that fare against the Big 12 or the Big 10 or the SEC? That would be my question, right? Because there's always going to be a difference in conferences. If you're playing all of your conference opponents and all of your conference is very far below your competition level, yeah, your statistics are going to look really, really good. So that's a part of it. But then at the end here, he tries to tie in. Well, some years the Big 10 might get 7, sometimes they might get 3. That's what would be best for the sport. Okay, yeah, I get it. You're trying to say that the Big 10 isn't maybe the best conference in football, and it seems like, yeah, the SEC seems to be kind of the king, but Kirk and Reese now have both alluded to, like, the Big 10 is where kind of ESPN or ESPN wants the success to be. Feels like that, especially with Ohio State and Michigan and all of that. So I don't love that he's like, well, sometimes Big 10 is going to go really, really well, and sometimes it's just not, and that's the sport, baby, and we're not going to get it perfect. My roundabout with all this, just tie it all up in a bow. Why are we making cop-outs? Why are we making excuses? Because they want the Big Ten and the SEC to have the best shot to make some real noise in the playoff, and then they can do that and say, well, it's not perfect. It's never going to be perfect. Why don't we just make it really close? Why? I don't understand. And that's kind of what he's saying here, kind of. But I don't love that. Like, the auto bids is the thing that we keep going back to. Why is it 4-4 and 2-2? Why are they not at least even, all 3s or even all 2s? And then you can at large bid the rest of. I don't understand why it's so lopsided. It's never going to be perfect. Okay. Never going to get it right. Okay. Why don't we get it pretty close? Why don't we at least get it within an area that makes sense? That's what I thought about this. Let me know if you disagree at Nick_Marv on Twitter in the comment section down below. I read them all. I just couldn't believe that Rece Davis basically copped out not only ESPN, but the College Football Playoff Committee here. I didn't think that was necessarily the right play. Let's transition from college football as a whole into Iowa State basketball. We're talking about the non-conference exhibition games coming up right after this. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Yikes. And now I budget smarter and I save more. My personal favorite feature is that managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without all the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money and use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. So we transition from the wild statements made in the sphere that is college football as a whole into the Iowa State Cyclones non-conference basketball schedule. You're here with Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Nick Marovitz, host of the greatest Locked On Cyclones show to ever exist, and we're breaking down this non-conference schedule, but specifically the two exhibition games for the Cyclones. Now, to catch you back up, we've talked about the non-conference schedule. If you want a deeper dive, I've done it on the channel or on the podcast page, wherever you find your podcast. But I'll run through them right here. October 17th at Creighton, October 26th, Northwestern. Those are the two we're mostly going to be talking about today. Then they'll take on Farley Dickinson, Grambling State. They'll take on Mississippi State on the road. Then they got Stonehill College, and they're at the Players Era Festival. A lot of big names in that tournament. That's going to be a super exciting one. I believe that's in Las Vegas. Then they got Alcorn State. They go on the road to Purdue. They'll play Iowa at home, Eastern Illinois, Long Beach State, and Houston Christian, all at home. Okay, pretty solid non-conference schedule. A lot of smaller schools in there, but the Players Era Festival going to be awesome. Very tough competition there. Iowa, Purdue, we'll touch on those. Well, not so much Iowa, but definitely Purdue in a little bit. Mississippi State, definitely. But Creighton and Northwestern are very, very interesting because they're the two exhibition games for the Cyclones, and they will be the first exhibition games for Iowa State since 2017. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Obviously, these won't count towards a regular season record. And Creighton, I guess more Creighton than Northwestern, but both of these teams are legitimate teams. You're not playing, I don't want to pick any school because I don't want to target anyone or call anyone out, but, some random state tech, whatever school that nobody goes to be as nice as I possibly can here. There are levels to this. You're not playing somebody like that in an exhibition. Now, the reason I bring this up is I do think that this is going to be great for the Cyclones. And it's also a sign of just how great the Cyclones have been. Okay. So Creighton kind of got that history, kind of been that team coming out of the Big East, a team that I generally make a bracket where they win it all come March. I think that they're a team that you just never really know, especially in recent years, what they're going to do. They've been really solid over the last few years. And Northwestern, a Big Ten team. I don't think the Big Ten's in the same conversation that the SEC and the Big 12 are in as far as basketball goes across the board. But still, a Power Four conference. This, to me, shows that, yes, Iowa State is trying to kind of answer some questions early about where we're at. 2 exhibition games, get the ball rolling, play some, relatively tough competition, and kind of see who's playing where, what, how, when, all of those kinds of questions. I believe it's the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, why. I think those are all W's. Then how, who, what, when, where, why, how. It's like 6, but there's the 5 W's. I think it's going to be great for the Cyclones in that aspect, but also I think this is a sign of Iowa State moving up on the ladder, because these teams, Creighton and Northwestern, wouldn't agree to this if they were not going to get anything out of it. For these teams, from my perspective, This is an opportunity for them to kind of go up against some really top tier talent. Now, I understand where Iowa State landed last year when everything was said and done, when all of the dust settled. It wasn't exactly where Iowa State wanted to be. It wasn't exactly where you or I wanted the Cyclones to end their season. Second round, falling to Ole Miss, I suppose. Obviously, a lot of injuries led to that, and it really the last quarter, I guess, of the season was pretty bumpy, to be completely honest. And I know that we've had conversations of was it a disappointment or wasn't it or whatever. It's not what I'm talking about here. I think that really Iowa State last year had an unbelievable ceiling. I think they did. If nobody gets hurt, if everything goes to plan, if Caleb Love doesn't make a 50-footer to force overtime in Arizona and they don't lose that game, they keep their mojo. I think there's a lot of factors that go into that. If Iowa State didn't kind of fall off the wagon, if you will, and could have at least gotten pretty close to where I thought their ceiling was, I thought they were a Sweet 16 team at the very least, in my opinion. Now, that's not where they ended up. It's fine. But I think that the last 4 years with Otzelberger have really kind of elevated this program to where now you can play teams like Northwestern, Creighton in exhibitions. You're playing Purdue, you're playing Mississippi State in the non-conference, because I believe it was Otzelberger himself that made the comment, like, this is a great sign because these teams, they have to have value coming back to them, right? Like they have to have a reason to want to play Iowa State. And I think that this just shows how good Iowa State is right now and how far we've come, which is a great sign, especially when we've kind of all agreed Iowa State is a basketball school, which we all love football. Don't get me wrong, but out of the two, seems like we're all kind of in agreement. It's a basketball school. So, that's obviously great news for the state of Iowa State athletics, the state of Iowa State basketball. Now, as far as Creighton and Northwestern, what'll happen in those games, I don't know, but I think this is a great kind of bookmark or measuring stick, like those measuring sticks, maybe for rain. I feel like it's a different thing, but it's a great measuring stick for this team to really understand, okay, well, maybe we don't play this player in this way. Maybe we can transition and move him around like this. It gives them a little bit more time to make some moves because obviously there are some big names on here. Mississippi State, just under a month, it looks like 3 weeks from that first exhibition game. That's going to be a tough one. And then you've got the Players Era just 2 weeks after Mississippi State. And then looks like about a week after the Players Era, you're at Purdue. And those are going to be big games for Iowa State to snag in this non-conference schedule to boost kind of their, win percentage over opponents and all of this whole thing. Those are going to be big games for Iowa State to get. And to have 2 exhibition games, I think it's going to be beneficial for this team to understand where they're at. They can make mistakes. You can kind of look at it like a practice, but it's full-blown game speed against top-level, I suppose, opponents who are also trying to take you down and see where they're at. So it's kind of like, it's not a scrimmage, but it's kind of like a scrimmage. Gives Iowa State a really good opportunity with, yes, they have some core returners, but in today's day and age, we've got a lot of fluidity as well. And these freshmen, I do think, can make a huge impact for Iowa State. So we can try different guys at different positions under different, minute limits and things of that nature. I'm very excited about Creighton and Northwestern being exhibition games for Iowa State to figure out who they are, and also to get to play, some relatively decent competition here. I think that these are both, at least Creighton for sure, tournament-worthy teams. Yeah, definitely Creighton, in my opinion. And at Creighton as well, that's going to be good news. I think that's a great opportunity for Iowa State to figure out where they're at. Long ways down the road, but nonetheless. Speaking of long ways down the road, let's talk about football. It's not that far, but it's kind of far. The transfer portal feels like it's eternity away, but it also just happened. I don't know. Let's talk about it coming up after this. So we just talked about some Iowa State basketball here at Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That was just after we talked about kind of national football coverage. I sandwiched that in there because we are now going back to kind of national football coverage, kind of national ideas as far as college football as a whole. And I've got some quotes from Mac Brown here, and I've got some ideas kind of based on what he says here. So Mac Brown, obviously, no longer the coach at North Carolina, at UNC. Bill Belichick has taken that role over. That's a whole storyline in and of itself. But nonetheless, let's talk about what Mac Brown had to say about the transfer portal. Excuse me, allergy season is getting the best of me, that is for sure. So Mac Brown, essentially what he's saying here is that kids need to stay 2 years out of school before they transfer. So now we've unboxed the package. We're talking about the transfer portal here. And the transfer portal is an area of college football that is under a lot of duress, I guess. It's under a lot of scrutiny. I think a lot of people disagree with how it's run, but there's also a lot of people who, well, I wouldn't say a lot of people, but there are people who are okay with how it's going. I don't think how it's going right now is perfect by any means, but there are multiple sides to this coin. Right now, it's kind of the wild, wild west. You can transfer in the fall and then decide 3 months later to transfer again. I don't think that's good for anybody, other than, I suppose, there would be a few tiny select amount of cases where, and Mac Brown talks about it here, where, maybe you transfer from school A to school B because you thought school B had a really solid opportunity football-wise for you. But then you get there and you realize, you talk to an academic advisor, you realize, well, nothing's going to transfer as far as credits goes. You're going to probably have to transfer out. Okay, well, maybe you're not a starter, maybe you're not a star, you're probably not looking at going to the league, but you just wanted to have a little bit more playing time. That would be a situation where going from A to B and realizing you maybe just didn't do the research before you got there, you go from B to C to get those credits to be worth something again. That would be like the most niche scenario where it would actually matter. But speaking on those credits, that's kind of, it seems like what Brown has in mind here. He says, basically, well, I'm not going to say basically, I'm going to literally read the quote, but I really think kids should stay 2 years out of school when they get there because they get mad as a freshman. They want to transfer, and that's not right. We're allowing kids not to have to work for something anymore. And if the stat I was given a few years ago, guys, is if you transfer once, you've got a 63% chance to graduate because your classes won't transfer. We've got kids transferring 4 or 5 times. They're not going to graduate, and then they're not going to get jobs, and then there could be mental health tied to it at the end. This is a further quote. We're not treating some of these kids fairly by allowing them the freedom to transfer anytime they want. And then maybe after that, we go back through. We had you transfer once because I like the transfer rule. We had kids that couldn't play. So if we made a poor decision, the kid couldn't play, you should have the right to transfer. But you'd like to think after 2 years, he's getting ready to go into his major. He's gotten rid of all the basic studies. He understands who is better. He's got 2 years. He's got some film available. It would be easier to transfer up to that after that second year. That second paragraph didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, and maybe I'm just bad at reading. But I think what he's getting at here is that transferring is going to cause strain on the academic side of things, which at the root of it all, we've gotten so far away from this that it doesn't even seem right to say this, but these are still student athletes. These are still kids, men or women pursuing further education outside of high school, and they just so happen to be like really good or wickedly good or semi-good, enough to make a team, whatever. I'm not taking shots at anybody, just enough to make a team good at a sport, so they decide to do that. Really, that's what we're looking at here. At its root cause, we've gotten so far away from that, it's very easy to lose sight of. These are still student athletes. These are still people who are going to, or at least are trying, in theory, to get degrees to further their education, or trying to further their education to move forward in life, to become an engineer, to become a lawyer or a doctor or whatever it is, kinesiologist. That's what I am. Tons of different routes you can go down, right? And so I understand the sentiment there. I understand the idea of, let's keep these kids accountable to a degree. It's not the word he used, but kind of let's keep the system true to what it really is. This isn't the G League for the NFL. This isn't the G League for the NBA. This is college athletics. These are student athletes. I can't necessarily argue with that. I can't necessarily disagree with that. Then here in the second quote that I read, it's kind of talking about after 2 years, you have a really good idea of where you're at. As far as in comparison to guys in the program, you've got some tape out there. You've maybe knocked out some of those basic level courses. You're starting to get into your 300, 400 level courses, or at least at Iowa State, that's what they're called. These degree specific type of courses, which generally I would say I didn't ever transfer, but I would say they don't transfer as well. Everything else below kind of transfers a little bit better. Now, like I said, I never transferred, so I can't speak 100% from experience on that. But the idea of after 2 years, you've kind of knocked out all this stuff. You've got an idea of where you're at. You've got some tape. I can't sit here and say that this is a terrible idea. I mean, is it the perfect move? I don't know. I would say probably not. There's probably going to have to be some adjustments. But overall, it does make relative sense. And then you're going to get the added benefit of guys that come out of high school not transferring right away for a program. That's a benefit for a program. There is now a little bit of incentive for these programs to recruit high-level high school guys, because I believe it was Rick Pitino of St. John's, I believe, that said, like, we aren't even recruiting high school guys. We're just getting guys out of the transfer portal because, I mean, there's just not a lot of point to recruiting high school players right now, the way that it's set up. And I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's right. That's just going to create some weird feeder system where you go from high school to JUCO or NAIA, or you go to D2 or whatever the case is, and you work your way up. Like, it's not that that's bad, but that's just not what it's been. But I guess you can't really make the argument we should do it that way because that's how it's always been. Like, that's what you don't want to do. But I don't think it's in the spirit of the game. So I think that there are some things that make sense with this. The other side, though, is I don't know if this would hold up in court because of the whole concept of, well, you can't hold me back from making more money somewhere else because I'm not under contract. So then do you introduce a contract when you commit to a school to play athletics? How does that whole thing look? What if you pull, some fancy business where they've got guys unenrolling and enrolling somewhere else? How does that work? How do you work with guys who maybe the contract says you're going to play sports here for this long? They decide they're going to quote unquote retire. And then once you retire, that null and voids the contract, and then they decide to start playing again somewhere else. How does that whole thing work? It's going to be a whole legal thing. That's going to be a mess. But I don't think what he's saying here is a bad idea. I don't think it's a terrible move. I think there has to be some restriction on some level in some way to the transfer portal. And yeah, I know that's about as vague as I could possibly get. I know that that's about as saying something without saying anything as I can possibly get. It's because I don't have the answer. I just don't think that right now things are perfectly fine. And I give kudos to Mac Brown for saying, at least something, an idea out there, throwing it out there. I just don't know if this is necessarily the best option, but I don't think that it was thrown out there as like, this is what we have to do. This is exactly what needs to be done for this to get done and for it to make sense. I don't think that's what he was saying, but I think that the sentiment of sticking around at a college or university for 2 years after you come out of high school before you end up moving around, it doesn't not make sense. Let's put it that way. It also doesn't not make sense for you to not hit the like button or the subscribe button, which a lot of double negatives in there. Nonetheless, be sure to hit subscribe so we can prove once and for all that it is in fact a Cyclone State. Thank you guys for sticking around to this point in the episode at Nick_Marv on Twitter. Until next time, Cyclone fans, sayonara.